Chapter 21. Scumbling a savvy is like spreading a thin layer of paint over yourself, Mama had told Rocket and Fish when she had them painting pictures with her on a winter morning before the holidays. I had stayed home sick from school that day and was enjoying lying on the sofa, watching my brothers render stormy ocean waves from memory. My ears had perked up when Mama started talking about how to scumble, and I'd paid close attention to her words. If you don't use enough paint, Mama continued, your savvy will come through too strong, causing some pretty big problems for both you and the rest of the world. Mama laughed as Fish and Rocket both made faces. They'd already knew far too well about such troubles. Mama went on, if you use too much paint, you'll not only obscure your savvy completely, but most everything else in life will become dull and uninteresting for you too. You can't get rid of part of what makes you, you, and be happy. Mama took her paintbrush and dipped it into a color much lighter than that already on her canvas. She brushed the light paint over the dark, completely covering it. But the light paint didn't block out the dark paint at all. Instead, that pale color had a softening blending effect, making the darker shade harmonize with the rest of the painting. So a well-scumbled savvy gives you clarity and control, lectured Mama. You have to let your own know-how, your own unique color, shine through as something special others can't quite something special others can't quite put a finger on. Mama had made it sound so easy. But managing that kind of success with a savvy could be more of a high-wire act than a cakewalk. Depending on the person and the savvy, it could take years to gain enough control to mingle easily with the rest of the world. And even adulthood didn't offer any guarantees of an effortless fit. That's why, back in Kinsack and Abranzes, homeschooling went way, way beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. Fish's wind blew stronger and stronger through the dark alleyway. I wasn't sure he'd storm that mightily since the day his hurricane had sent us packing. After turning 13, Fish had never stopped needing to work extra hard to let his own particular color shine through all his dark storm clouds. Having a really powerful savvy, like his, was similar to waking up with a savage temper. It required a lot of extra effort and patience to control. There in Emerald, far from home, with Fish storming his storm, and the great and powerful Ozzy knocked down to size inside the diner, I was starting to feel low on heart, and my brains and bravery weren't so sure either. Fish and I weren't in Kinsack and Abranzes anymore. We didn't have any yellow bricks to guide us, just a big pink bus and the yellow stripes on the highway. I let out a shriek as a four-cornered "No Parking Anytime" sign ripped from its post and spun through the air in a spiraling wind. The sign flew toward Bobby and Will, and I screamed, "Watch out!" Fish caught sight of the plummeting sign and spun on his heel. In a wink and a blink, he turned aside the hurtling object with a controlled burst of deflecting wind. Controlled. Fish had controlled his outburst, aimed it even. The sign clattered to the ground from its midair path, like a kite plummeting to the earth when the wind suddenly dies. Fish took a step back in surprise, and his storm shut down faster than it had started. My brother looked at his hands. He appeared to have finally found the right color paint to complement his savvy. "Cool," he said under his breath. Fish then turned toward a sagging cardboard box that had come to rest about 10 feet away. Looking at the box, he squinted his eyes, making his eyebrows come together above his nose with the intensity of his concentration. After a second, the box lifted slightly and then tumbled away down the alley, carried on a focused gust of air. Fish smiled, then turned back to Bobby and Will, concern rearranging his features, his fury gone with the wind. "You two okay?" he asked, taking a hesitant step toward them. For once, Bobby was speechless. Not even her little angel had much to say. Bobby nodded, looking dazed. Behind her, Will Jr. was grinning at us, like he finally was finally sure he understood the joke. Excellent, pronounced Will, with a satisfied laugh. Lester Swan was still hanging out the door of the bus, looking up at the rising moon in the clear, tranquil sky. Twister country, he muttered, oblivious to the true nature of the haywire weather. Come on, kids. Everybody's in. It's time for us to move on. Climbing back into the bus, Will sat down next to me, still smiling, his left knee bumping my right one. To my surprise, and everyone else's too, Bobby sat down by Fish. Will picked gravel from the fries in his burger basket before offering it around to the group. Aside from Samson, who sat happily digging his finger into the center of the stolen pie, now resting on Lil's knee, Will had the only remaining dinner. The other baskets littered the ground between the diner and the bus. I think we ought to put a bit of distance between ourselves and Emerald, Lester, Lil suggested, looking anxiously out the window. Lester nodded his head and started the engine. He seemed worn out by his uncharacteristic exploits, and glad to have someone else to tell him what to do. Where should I take you, Lil? He said, over his shoulder, as we pulled the bus out of the alley behind the diner. Well, I don't think I want to go back home just yet, Lil replied. Ozzy knows where I live, and after the way I left him... She trailed off with a shiver, then continued. You were on your way to Salina with these kids, Lester. Maybe we should just head down there. That is, if you all don't mind me tagging along. Lil looked around at each of us. We all shook our heads and bit our tongues. It wasn't like any of us would tell her no. We hadn't even asked permission to be on that bus ourselves. Lester? Lester hardly had to answer the big woman. He was so glad Lil wanted to travel on with us that he had tears in his eyes. I'd take you anywhere, Lil Kitley, he said. My heart leaped at the thought of getting to Salina and seeing Papa at last. I knew, after the report on the TV in the diner, what Rocket's electrical damage might mean for Papa. My brother had to be fearfully upset to cause such monstrous mayhem. Even if I couldn't do anything to help Papa at all, I needed to hold his hand, kiss his cheek, and let him know that I was there and that he was loved. As he drove, Lester's shoulders began to convulse more violently than ever, and the thin man started squirming in his seat like a small child. What is it, Lester? Asked Lil, seeing his discomfort. Lester cast a glance over his shoulder at us kids. Well, he said, all milk toast and mouse-like, I've got a delivery to make in Waymore in the morning, and my boss wouldn't be too pleased if I miss it. I've already gummed up the rest of my deliveries today. If I bungle another, well, I might lose my job. He sniffed. I might lose my bus. Oh, poor Lester, Carleen sniggered. Poor stupid Lester. What would he do without his precious bus? He'd sell coffee at the bus station, that's what, clucked Rhonda. But, we all began to protest, we have to get down to Salina Hope, Mr. Swan. We just have to, I pleaded. But Lester had set his mind and refused to even look in our direction. I can't lose my bus, he said, was all he'd say, quiet but firm, as though all his gears had locked into place. Lil looked perplexed. It would be a shame for you to lose your job, too, Lil said with a sigh, looking down sadly at her green waitressing uniform. But the kidlings, Lester. What about them? What about Selena and their father? Surely there are some folks down there waiting for these kids. To this, nobody replied. Lester twitched. The rest of us worried and fidgeted. Lil's eyes narrowed as she looked around at us, all inside the dim interior of the bus. Bobby busied herself with unrolling her last bit of bubble tape. Fish whistled noiselessly. Will Jr. just stared at his knees, running a hand through his curly hair, and I tugged at a loose piece of white rickrack that hung down from the sleeve of my dress. Only Samson managed not to look noticeably guilty as he sat next to Lil, alternating between bites of burger with snitches of pie. Lil stiffened and crossed her arms over her chest. All right, what's going on here? I may have a knack for being tardy, but I'm not usually so late to catch on. I think maybe someone ought to start explaining to me exactly what I've gotten myself into the middle of right now.